What up, TJ?
So, man,
How you doing?
not too bad. Are you able to see me?
No, no, the camera's not on.
Hold on. There we go.
What up, dude?
Oh, man, how you been? It's been, what, 12 years, 13
It's,
years?
it's been a minute, man. Yeah, I mean, definitely more than a decade, probably since like high
Oh,
school,
yeah.
right?
Basically high school, yeah.
Yeah. What have you been up to since then?
Nothing. Just hanging out. I live 5 minutes away from Worthington,
Okay.
Clintonville. Um, yeah, just been working on a house and going to work. And, I got a kid now.
Oh,
Um,
dude, congrats.
yeah, thank you. She's
Yeah.
2, and she's mean. And but I love her and everything. We got another one on the way.
Oh, sweet. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how about you?
Pretty much the same, man. So I went to school in Indiana at Butler, and so I was there, with school and just like getting jobs and everything. After that, I was in Indiana for about 10 years, and then I got married over there. And so my wife and I ended up moving here. I got a job with Honda, and so we came back here, and it's been about 2 years since then. But in the midst of that all, I got in a snowmobile accident, broke my neck, and now I'm in a wheelchair. So, we've been kind of getting used to that new life. So that's kind of really it. No kids, nothing like that, man.
Yeah. What's I see I've seen some of your rehab videos. Like, what's your status? Like, do you have a chance of being able to walk? I mean, in the future, or
So it's
made any
quite.
progress?
Yeah, we've seen a little bit of progress. Like it's quite interesting because they say like every spinal cord injury is unique, and so they can't even give you like a prediction. But it is considered an ailment without a cure. The conversion rate as far as people who do gain functionality of their body is pretty low. So it is kind of presented to you as a life sentence. But there have been a lot of instances of people who have recovered from it. So it's not something you can say. But when I first got hurt, this is my right hand. When I first got hurt, it didn't really work at all. I couldn't pull a tissue out of a tissue box, and I would say it's maybe 90% of normal. It's just a little bit of diminished strength. But
Yeah.
my left hand is kind of that's kind of all I can do with it. But I wasn't able to do this with it before. It's like it didn't move at all. So I can
Yeah.
kind of pick up things with it, but that's about it, man.
Well, I mean, I'm hopeful that just the way that technology advances, that I think within 5-10 years, there's a good chance that that's an easy curable thing. But you know,
It
you know,
seems like there's more research going to it.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So, but yeah, so I think this is I really like what you do with like a lot of your posts. You're really thoughtful, and I really appreciate people that can kind of reach out and have a clear head and um, are seeming to be open to kind of all sides and wants to talk things out. And
Yeah.
I just wanted to reach out because I like to think that I want to hear all sides and kind of challenge people, and I like to talk to people that have some different opinions than I do. Most of my friends, I feel, are on kind of a different opinion than me. I like that. I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
surround yourself by the same kind of person. It can be boring, and there's no growth.
Exactly.
You
Yep.
kind of get your own bubble.
It's like those echo chambers, man. We all kind of exist in them. And, this experience for me has been, like I say that I've grown in the past week or so more than I have in the past couple of years, just because I've heard so many different perspectives, and it's really opened my eyes to some blind spots that I didn't think I had. So it's been interesting for me because, I like to think I'm smart, but, being smarter is so cool because you get to know more about the world. And so I appreciated you reaching out to me, and I appreciate you saying that, man. I'm like very excited about having this dialogue with you.
Yeah, same here. So, and I've kind of, I don't know if you've ever wanted to. I've kind of had an interest in like making videos and like doing podcasts and whatnot. And so I figured I have not really done it. And so kind of like I think it'd be good practice anyway to just kind of just toss it out there and see, what happens and, how it goes. And
Yeah.
who knows,
Might as well, man,
Yeah, for sure. But I don't know if you wanted to start with just what is your philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
and how would you define your politics, and how did you arrive to where you're at? Kind of where did you start, maybe high school to where you're at now? Because I know for me, I've shifted greatly from where I was at, 10 years ago.
Yeah. So that's actually that's an interesting question. So I had a unique life experience, I think, man. I think everyone does, but I kind of got to exist amongst two cultures. So when I grew up, we lived in a neighborhood that wasn't considered the best. There was perhaps illegal activity that went on that the neighborhood knew about, and that yielded, some crime. And the schools around there weren't the greatest, but my family knew the importance of education, and so they pulled together money and sent me to a private school. And so I went to this private Jewish school, and grew up amongst a completely different culture of people. People whose families came from a lot of money, surgeons and things like that. And I go back to this neighborhood where I made fun of for, quote, talking white, and I'm different because I don't necessarily fit in either place. And I've kind of rode that wave my life, but it's allowed me to meet some different people, and I think has opened my eyes to, I always had to understand where people came from. So that's kind of like who I am in a nutshell, a little bit, as a starting place. My life philosophy has shifted a lot. I would say, I'm definitely left of center, but not like super far, not on a lot of things. I'm very pro Second Amendment, for a lot of reasons. And I'm pretty, constitutionalist, actually, as it comes to that. But on the opposite side, like, I kind of feel like we should consider, like, marijuana and things like that. And I feel like that's kind of been touted as a progressive issue. And, it's just, I don't know, it's just a plant to me. So that's kind of like those views. I guess I'm a Democrat, if we had to pick a side, but I think that's a problem, though, that there are, like, it's become a team sport. But I think just more of my views kind of align with that side. And because I'm, I, I don't know. I'm not really big on tradition. So conservatism has never really, like, appealed to me that much from a pure sense. I'm always kind of, curious about, what's the next thing, what's the new thing coming? How can we make this better for all of us? And can we get there right now? Like, I'm kind of impatient in that regard, so does that help, as a starting place?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. How
I
about
think it's good.
yourself?
I think it's good to zoom out and kind of just see, kind of where people are coming from and how people define terms, and kind of like see where you're at. Because I think it helps you empathize with that person and kind of see where they're at. And to me, and this is someone I follow that I've got this from, when you have like discussions, especially with people that that if you differ with them, you should always seek clarity over agreement.
Right.
Because people who go for agreement are setting themselves up for failure. They're going to fight. They're going to never. People don't agree, and even if they do agree, they don't do it immediately.
Exactly.
Oh shit! I never thought about that. But no one gives. You'll never have an argument where someone goes like, "Wow, I'm wrong. You're right. Congratulations."
Right.
World.
Yeah.
And so, as long as you get clarity, as long as you just say, like, you know what, that's where you're at. That's where I'm at. That, I think that's a good way to just be like, okay, at least I know what they're thinking, as opposed to hearing what I think the other side or what that person is saying, I guess.
Because people make a lot of assumptions, right? And so then you mischaracterize a person, and you want to vilify them because you perceive them on this other side, and so you're going to tend toward the worst view of them.
Oh yeah,
that's what it seems like. So that's why.
Then you only attribute negative, like the most negative things for their motivations.
Right. Yeah.
I think when you talk to people, you find that most people aren't that evil. They might be wrong, they might be ignorant, or they might just have a different philosophy that just doesn't comply, or maybe things aren't as important, or things are more important. But I think true evil is rare. Psychopaths, have, but with the exception of mass evil, where it's just kind of everybody's along the same lines kind of evil. Nazis and communists and whatnot, where everybody's kind of on the same boat but self-righteous about it.
That's an important distinction. So yeah, thanks for calling that out, man.
Yeah. So you say you're left of center. How do you define left and right? So like, what is that parameter equal? So what means something is more left and what means something is more right? I define that differently than some other people.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. For me, I guess I think I have to come to terms with the fact that I don't necessarily have clear ideas about left and right per se. I think you're fed a lot of what you believe that to be, and so there is some stereotype associated with that. But if I'm being honest, when I think left, I think environmentally friendly. I think progressive. I think politically correct. I think I don't know, just kind of like, I do think a little more open-minded, because I think progressivism is rooted in change and kind of just moving forward, where conservatism is sticking to tradition and the way things kind of were. And so I think there's something there. And whether I'm right about that, I'm not sure. But and when I think on the right, I think very patriotic. I think this idea of like family and law enforcement and things like that are held dearly. I think gun rights. I think pro life. What else? That's kind of some of those nuggets. What do you feel about
it? So I've always had like the right left, meaning centralized control. So like, to me, somebody who's like a left position is, we need to increase Social Security. A right position is, we need to cut Social Security. A far right position is, we need to end Social Security. Like, that's, so to me, far right means you are just almost to anarchy. And then left to me is more government control, more centralized control. You get the more positive rights, I guess, than negative rights. It's like it's a belief that the government should be a provider of things, as opposed to a constitution based on negative rights, where it's the government's job to protect rights but not be able to take things away from you. So like, our Constitution is negative rights. It's the right to free speech. It's the right to a gun. It's not, here's a gun. It's just the right to have a gun. It's the right to not have soldiers quartered in your house. It's the right to have the federal government not interfere with your business or whatever. And I think a lot of like when you get further and further progressive, it's a belief in positive rights, of a right to a house, a right to health care, a right to food, right to a good paying job, things that the government should provide for you. And so I think that kind of view of government, to me, is what defines left and right. So for those reasons, I see myself on the right. And I guess it doesn't, like, to me, like, I'm pro marijuana. Like I'm pro heroin. I'm not saying that you should do heroin, but I don't.
Me too.
Say on if you do heroin or not, and I don't think it's very successful at keeping people from doing heroin. If anything, they advance the cartels because they minimize the market for it. So the only way you can get heroin is dealing with like people from Mexico that are gun running and into some crazy shit, as opposed to just going to a local convenience store and getting like FDA graded heroin.
Right. But yeah, then you have people cutting it, then you have people dying, like all this stuff. You have fentanyl.
Right.
Yeah. When they could just regulate it.
Right. So what would be the difference between you and a libertarian?
So, man, that's interesting. So before I get to that point, I don't want to negotiate or negate that or anything like that, or make it feel like I'm disregarding it. I think it's your left right is interesting, because as you speak through that, I agree with you. I'm like, man, like, from that perspective, I would consider myself right. But I think where it gets a little bit convoluted is, say for instance, the pro-life argument. It seems like that to me is overreach to tell, you know, a woman what they could and could not do with their body. You have the religious argument that is another layer on that, which I think complicates it even further. But like that to me seems like big government, like to be able to you know, be so involved in your personal health affairs. So I think that's where it like convolutes it for me. Um, yeah, and I think, you know, from my perspective, I kind of agree too that, you know, the healthcare thing is a left argument. But to me, it just kind of seems like, I don't know, if we're this great country and, you know, we have all this money and everything like that, like, shouldn't we at minimum be able to like kind of take care of the basic needs of our citizens? But what I think it gets complicated is like, how do you define what those basic needs are, who gets what, and how that, you know, how's that equal? How do you make sure that there's equity in that? So I think there's a problem there. And I think that's why this is all so complicated, man. And we need to stop yelling at each other. But
It's a
yeah,
very
so,
complicated. I think people too often oversimplify it and just make things polarizing, when I think people need to step back and just see how complex the entire conversation is.
yeah, and meme culture doesn't help. So
No, and
actually,
Twitter, limiting characters, basically. You have to
yeah,
have this non-depth, like, kind of ideas.
yeah, it just becomes like these quips and these jabs just to like gain internet points. And so people just
Yeah.
try to say the most clever thing instead of seeking to understand each other. So that the goal changes, you know?
Yeah.
Uh,
And like,
Um,
I always find that I'm on the side of, like, being somebody who thinks that a society should be able to serve itself, not with a paternal relationship of government, but citizens for each other. I think the arguments against, say, minimum wage or against healthcare or against kind of these succinct, quick, like, you know, we're for this arguments are very complex. And so a platform like Twitter uh, is like being on the away team when someone else has home field advantage, because I think the arguments against mine are very succinct, quick. This, you know, it's emotional. It's very just, okay, yeah, you know, you're right. We should have a right to this or right to that. But explaining why you shouldn't doesn't fit well in 250 characters. It's, I think, a more detailed argument against it, I guess.
yeah, there are books written on this stuff. There are classes studied on these issues. There are, you know, people whose jobs are dedicated to figuring these things out. And you know, me and my buddies were talking the other day, and we were like, you know, I'm supposed to try to understand the way the world works, while at the same time, you know, I have to cook dinner, I have to, you know, balance my budget, I have to do laundry, I have to mow my grass. You know, it's like all these things. It's like they're so complicated. How do you even have time for them? And so then that's when you get this situation where people are just reading headlines and, you know, they're kind of, I think it's, you can be susceptible to being told what to think because it's just easy to digest, you know?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I guess it would be fair to go, like, to say, I guess, my politics, my history, um, and uniquely, you do have a little bit of a play in this. I think I told you about it like a few weeks ago on one of your posts.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I voted for Barack Obama when I was 18, and I, I was disappointed quick. I felt like it was just Bush extended, basically. More, you know, the same wars in the Middle East, expansion of government, not um, not work focusing on spying, and a lot of that stuff wasn't going away. Still getting molested at the airport. A lot of that stuff just kind of continued on the same trajectory.
Yep.
And you know, you get older, you start learning about different ideologies and what other people are saying. And some of what Ron Paul was saying had resonated with me around that time, because that was the first time I really heard the anti-institution arguments of, you know, what does a society look like without that relationship with government? You know, should the government like, it always seemed natural to me, and I brought up heroin, that that heroin would be illegal. Why would you want people to do heroin? When that wasn't the argument I was ever presented, was, well, why would the government have a place in that in the first place? Whether it's wrong or not should not mean it should be a law or not. I think learning about the misuse of law was kind of like beginning to be a change for me. And so he and I think also I saw how his treatment was by the media, of all media, of MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, how dismissive they were of him, where he would say some very rational, common sense argument that people would be like, yeah, this is great. And then the news would just be like, that was ridiculous. And they would just, I felt like they were trying to just kind of make you, not let you see what that argument was. They didn't want to present it to you. That was kind of the first time where I'm like, why is there such a, I guess, collective effort to stymie the same philosophy? Why does it seem like everybody seems to have the same philosophy of no, we believe in the institution of government, we hold it dear, it's supposed to do this, and any argument that derails the I guess the dichotomy of Republican and Democrat shouldn't be even be considered. And so I was kind of open to that at that point. And then you had and I don't know what your motivations were, what you had, where you were at the time, but you had shared a Milton Friedman video. I think it was the 5 myths that conceal reality. And it was just a whole new world of arguments that I had not seen before, and explained in a very rational way. Because up until that point, my assumption of conservatives was they weren't compassionate. They didn't care about their fellow man. They would let a poor man just sink and just look the other way. And the argument for minimum wage was you either care about your fellow man or you were evil. And that was just something that was just a thing. You thought that of the other side. And so Milton Friedman kind of dispelled some of these myths and at least provided the arguments for the other side that I had never heard before. And it really resonated. It made sense. They were common sense. They were kind of off the grid. You'd never learned them in school. You didn't know about Milton Friedman when you were in school.
Right.
And then it leads you down the path to like Thomas Sowell, to Hayek, to Bastiat, to more modern thinkers of this whole new philosophy, this whole new understanding of things that you weren't really seeing on TV, you weren't seeing in Hollywood, and you weren't seeing in school. So I guess part of this you're at fault for. Hey.
Hey man, well, hey, my motivation was pure. That was right along the time that I was having kind of the same epiphanies. So I had a buddy who actually introduced me to Terence McKenna. It was a video he sent me, and it was talking about just like the idea of consumerism and like how you should create instead of consuming. And just kind of I was like, whoa, like these are some new ideas. And that led to like Alan Watts, and that led to just like I was like, man, okay, I'm kind of getting a little bit more of the spiritual side. Let me understand how this game works that we're forced to play, like economics. So it's like I'm looking up Friedman, I'm looking up all these different things, and his minimum wage argument, I had never thought about it that way, man. I was like, yeah, that's just a step on the ladder, but the ladder is like infinitely long. So you can shed this idea that
everybody below that step just moves up to that new minimum, when in reality those jobs just kind of dissipate and get replaced. So then the minimum wage truly becomes zero as opposed to whatever the minimum wage is.
Right. And then the rise of automation, how's that going to change the game too? Speaking of jobs going away, so
sure.
Yeah.
It creates like a financial incentive to replace people even further.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So yeah, my motivations were pure, brother. Like for sure.
Yeah. All right. I try to like write some stuff down and kind of like give something like topics and whatnot.
Yeah.
So here's a fundamental difference that I see between like progressives and conservatives. So like, all right, I'll throw a question out there. Would you say that do you think America overall is a racist place?
I do think so. I think there's some inherent systemic things that people, like you said, we didn't learn about it in school, and I think it's easy to kind of be like, oh, well, that doesn't make me feel comfortable, so I don't really want to hear about it. I have family members who've experienced some of these policies and saw them play out. So I think there's if you've lived in a system where that is the case, right? These ideas are going to get passed down in some form from your predecessors. The people my grandpa told me stories growing up, and this shaped my opinions in a certain way. And so I do think there is some racism that exists. What do you think?
Well, I think racism exists everywhere, and not everywhere, but I mean, like, if you go anywhere you go in the world, you'll find cases of racism and cases where people are good people. But would you classify the United States, if someone asked you, is the United States a racist place? Would you say that it's a racist place?
I don't know, man, because I feel like the way government has historically been run has been racist. But when you say America, like, what do you mean? Like, do you mean the people? Do you mean, I think,
Everything.
right.
The institutions, the people, the
I'd
culture.
say overall, yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the way I feel, man.
That's perfectly fair. I'm just saying, I'm using this to kind of demonstrate a fundamental difference that I see. So I don't think that I wouldn't classify the United States as a racist place, but I do say that there's cases of racism. There's cases of a racist history. And so here's the fundamental difference that I see between progressives and conservatives. What are you juxtaposing reality to? Because if I feel that the fundamental difference between the left and the right is that the left tends to juxtapose the current situation to utopia, a land without racism, a land without hate, a land without pollution, a land without murder, a land without any kind of bad things happening whatsoever. And when you juxtapose things to utopia, you're only going to see the negative. You're only going to see, the hate, the murder, the whatever, and all the things that are similar to utopia, you don't really see, because that's similar. The only things that are stark and stand out are how things compare to this vision in your head of what the world could be. What I think what I juxtapose reality to is the rest of the world and the rest of time. And to me, I can't think of a more multi-ethnic, more open, progressive, least racist country than the United States. I can't see one throughout the rest of the world, and I can't see an earlier time that I feel is less racist. So that's how I would classify the United States, as while there is racism that exists, and while there's remnants within institutions, I think it's the least racist country in the least racist time.
Yeah, that's a very valid point and a perspective I had not ever considered, to be honest with you, because how do you get further than the cutting edge? There has to be a cutting edge. And I would agree that we are, the most, advanced nation that has existed. I mean, at least
diverse.
Yeah.
I think Black people are here have it better than anywhere else or any other time. I heard that if you just took Black America, their GDP would be, just Black America would be 16th best in the entire world. And I think that, yes, I think we need to point out, obviously, like, things that are wrong, but I think we need to step back and say that we live in a wonderful time that, I don't think that people understand just how brutal and horrible most of human history is and most of the world is. Just insane poverty, no opportunity, just working from dawn till dusk, for pennies. It's only relatively recently that things have gotten decent. And so I think if you've only seen it being like running very well, you can juxtapose to kind of what you think the world should be, as opposed to, let's say, someone who came from a third world communist country and then came to the United States. They're gonna, if you ask them, what do you think about the United States? Fucking love it.
Yeah.
On a door through shark infested waters to get here.
Yeah.
They have a different perspective. I think they're more grateful for kind of where they're at.
That's a good point, man. I'm humbled by this, actually, because once I'm sitting here like thinking about the rest of the world. I'm sitting here thinking about the videos I've seen, the places I've visited, and I'm like, I'd rather be here. Like I want to be here.
Yeah, and I could agree that obviously there's racist history and even elements of racism just within different institutions. but I have to say that it's the best place, to live for anybody, honestly. And I think that's why it's been a beacon of hope for the whole world to get on a boat with nothing or a plane and just come over here and start a new life. And then to me, that's what a conservative is conserving what makes America the best country, the most sought after country, the richest country on the world. If I was in like communist China, I would be not a conservative. I'd be a radical on the opposite side, because I think it's a miserable place to live. You got your social credit score. You got 3 million Muslims in concentration camps. It's kind of a miserable. There's no escape kind of place. I don't think you can get a passport. If someone's a dissident and you hang out with them, then your credit score goes down.
Right.
Like avoid people that are in any way disobedient. It's just kind of dehumanizing and not a kind of place I'd want to live. But that was kind of an epiphany for me. I thought of that out of nowhere a couple years ago, and it was not even politics. It was a personal story. It was my wife. She tends to do that in her own life, where she will build up a utopia in her head if she's in a tough spot, or just kind of like, maybe things are just stressful. We're in a chaotic time. Our house is torn apart, and we tend to buy houses that are like fucked up, and then fix them up while we live in them, and then like sell them in 2 years. That's kind of been our thing for a little bit.
That's awesome.
So oftentimes we just live in chaos, where it's like, the wall's not even done yet. There's no paint on that wall. There's some like construction debris over there. And now we're in a time of like kind of peace. But she's just been through those moments where she would create a utopia in her head and say, if I can just get to this point, then the world's just going to be like such a better place. And then when you create a utopia in your head, it's always vague. There's no nuance, there's no detail. And so when you actually get to that point and then you see the nuance and the detail, it never stacks up to the greatness of the utopia that you created in your own head. And so I think she was doing that, where she would just create this utopia. If I can just get to this point, and she was sometimes she has the ability to be depressed. Not often, but just kind of down, sometimes. And she had done that with some kind of milestone where she just thought if she got to a certain point that, things would just be sunshine and butterflies.
That happens with PhDs. Typically, after people get their PhDs, they experience this period of Great Depression because, they were working toward this goal, then they get it, and it's not as gratifying. There's not this like, lasting feeling,
right.
with that. And so then they get sad. Yeah.
Yeah, you're building up for this whole thing. You thought you'd be spit out on, some golden whatever, and everybody would clap, and it would be amazing. And then you get to reality, it's like, oh, well, still same bullshit. You got to deal with other stuff. It's more chaos. Things present themselves that you didn't know that were there. You just didn't think about it.
Right.
And so I think I was like, I think you have a sense of like, I think you need to become grateful. I think, I told her, I was like, you would, instead of looking and comparing your situation to reality, compare it to what it used to be, or compare it to what other people are dealing with. Because overall, you have a pretty good life. We're not living paycheck to paycheck. You're not struggling. You got friends, and your family's nearby. And now she has, we have a kid, and you got a second kid on the way. And just think about how many people wish they could even just have a kid. There's a lot of people that just can't have kids, or they didn't think about having a kid till they're like 50. And like, oh shit, and then they just have like a couple cats. Like, there's I think when you compare it to what reality could be, I think you set yourself up to be happy. I think that's kind of what happiness is being grateful and being able to compare your situation to what the reality could truly be, as opposed to setting yourself up for misery by always comparing it to utopia. And then once I had said that, I kind of like worked that out into what we do as a society, in how one side, I think, compares reality to how miserable things have been and could be, versus comparing it to utopia and just being miserable because, oh my God, we polluted, or this happened, or there's a mass shooting on the news that, got me really riled up. It's like, you don't watch the local news in every single like city in the country. It will make you miserable. It's always sad fucking stories. It's always just, 5 kids were raped and burned alive today. And
it's
anyway,
like, whoa, yeah, it's like what? Yeah.
Yeah, if that's all you're bombarded with, you're just gonna feel fucking miserable. You're like, why would this happen? And
Yeah.
It's a big place, and things, have sucked. Things have sucked miserably. I mean, there's been millions of, slaves and tortured and concubines and just serfs, and the vast majority of human history is just bullshit people that have a miserable existence and just live in the dirt, and they're Amish or just, farming all fucking day. It's just like everybody has to step back and be like, this is fucking amazing.
It's actually dope. Yeah.
There might be things that suck, but man, this is like an amazing time and place to be. Like, I had Instacart come and deliver fucking groceries the other day.
Right.
Like,
we're talking to each other right now. Like, you know what I mean? Like, through the air. This is happening through the air somehow. I don't know how the internet works,
This was a rich service. Rich people would have their groceries delivery. Like, I'm not a rich person. And fucking all groceries delivered from like 3 different grocery stores coming from the exact same time. It's 2020. Go to grocery stores anymore. Like, that's just what it is.
Right. Like, people used to like go on whole voyages for spices, and now I can go get them for cents, down at the grocery store, whatever I want,
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it's just that was kind of an epiphany for me, and it kind of just worked out into how I saw politics. And I think just I'm always fascinated by the fundamental difference is between what seems to be more and more like the 2 camps of people, the what we call the left and the right.
Yeah. I think that's interesting, man. One book that really, really resonated with me, it was Napoleon Hill, and the title's escaping me right now as I look at my bookshelf. What was the title of that book? Because I keep thinking As a Man Thinketh, but that's James Allen. So I'm sorry, I'm confusing it. But anyhow, Napoleon Hill defines success as the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. And I was like, that's cool, because it's kind of like, it's always going to be a journey. As long as you're carrying out things that are going to get you closer to where you want to be, you're going to be having a great time. Like, what's more successful than that, And there was another quote I liked that was just kind of like, if you build good habits, then time becomes an asset. And I was like, that's true. Like, if you do the things today, that are the steps to where you want to be, you'll eventually get there. And a lot of people just don't have plans. They don't have goals,
Yeah.
They just float on by. They show up at work, and, they come home.
On to the day, they get drunk on the weekends and move to the next thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think too, like, I think a lot of people are just tired too. I think it's, everybody just works. When you really break it down, you're paying, like, this is my libertarian coming out. You pay 40% of your time is spent working for the government. That means Monday and Tuesday you're working for the government, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, then you're working for yourself. Or basically you're working till like May for the government, and then the rest of the year for yourself. And so there's just a smaller and smaller pie that people are able to enjoy for all the time that they spend tolling their days away at their jobs.
And we spend time arguing with each other about how we're going to allocate that, instead of uniting on why the hell are we spending 2 days, working for the government?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, what is that about?
I feel like if I said that, I could unite the world in just a fueled fucking revolution of, like, how the fuck are we spending, 40% of our time just working for the government? That's basically like we're slaves 40% of the time. You don't enjoy 40% of your labor, and then you can hear is the other 60%.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, and what's crazy about that is you get your little chips that are left over, and then there's a sales tax. And then there's excise taxes on, like gas, and, paying your registration for your car, and all these permits and things that you have to get that are taxes. You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
I'm with you, man. I don't understand why people aren't screaming like, "What the hell is this about?" Instead of just
Yeah,
screaming at each other.
right. Or Social Security. Like I think that should be one of those things that just it's a literal Ponzi scheme.
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
a person that can to tell me the difference between Social Security and a Ponzi scheme. The government takes 12% from just this group of people. They don't. It's not like the government's investing it and like, oh yeah, we put it in the S&P 500 and we fucking make money. No. They just took a pool of money and then hope that it pays for all the retired people. And
Right.
that works great when there's just not a lot of retired people and a whole bunch of young people. But now we're getting to the point where like, oh shit, apparently populations don't go up exponentially every fucking year. Apparently they stabilize. And then once it stabilizes, like, oh shit, we don't have nearly enough money to pay people out. And so then, I think someone did a calculation. What they would have made, they would have probably made like, they would have had like, if they had kept that 12%, they would have had like $2 million or something like that. And they're like, yeah, you could live off the interest if you were just really conservative with your investing and live off $100,000 a year for the rest of your retirement.
Dude,
Or
think about that.
30 grand for until you die.
Right.
You know what I mean? That guy
Yeah.
got robbed like fucking crazy.
It's like, unbelievable, man. And even the new talking point is like, you talk to anybody and they're like, oh, we're not going to see Social Security. And I'm like, and you're cool with
We're
that?
okay with that?
Yeah, like that. We're just accepting that? Like, it's so weird to me.
I know.
Yeah.
You want to hear something really depressing?
Let's hear it.
Let's just make it worse. Let's just make it as terrible as possible. Do you know how we're like $24 trillion in debt? Like just a shit ton of money that's not even comprehensible.
Yeah.
So that all the money that's owed to Social Security is not part of that debt, that number. And so, for example, all the money that's owed next year is not in that number, or the year after that. Right. So, do you want to hear what the actual debt is?
Let's hear it.
In Social Security, unfunded liabilities, $100 trillion.
What even is that, dude? Like, what even is like? Is that even?
Yeah, that's if we were all millionaires, and then you have to take all of our money, I guess, and you still wouldn't have enough to cover it.
Yeah.
Like it's just stupid. It's gonna collapse at that point. Like there's just it doesn't work.
And then my friends were talking about that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
It's another $50 trillion in Medicaid and Medicare.
Another $50 trillion.
$50 trillion. Yep. So 60% of all spending, of all government spending, goes to Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. Medicaid and Medicare have done nothing but make healthcare more expensive. I think people think Medicaid and Medicare pay your like whole medical costs. I think Medicare does, or no, Medicaid's for poor, Medicare is for old. So for Medicare, the old, they only pay 80%. Huh. So even then, you're paying for this program in which you are still paying 20%, and that 20% can become massive.
That's true, man.
What the fuck are we even paying this for?
And I've experienced that. So like, with my like the medical industry. So I, broke my neck, paralyzed. I had to go to therapy. I, had to pay these, surgery bills and things like that. One time I got this bill and it was for $9,000. And I was like, well, what is this? This is crazy. And they're like, oh, well, it's, what you're responsible for after your insurance, stop paying. And I'm like, okay. And so I was like, what month was that? And they said it was October. And I was like, well, what about, November, December, the rest of the year? And they're like, oh yeah, your actual balance is $24,000. And I was like, whoa, like for what? Like I go to therapy like twice a week for like an hour. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah. What am I paying for, first of all? And then second of all, I called and I figured out that I was covered and it just disappeared. That bill just disappeared. And another one on you, I got a $2,000 bill one time. I actually owed that. Like I knew I had to pay that. It was, out of pocket cost. I called, I said, hey, my insurance company is giving you about $40,000 or so this year. I'm a guy, I'm not a company. Like, is there any way that we could negotiate this down? They made some phone calls and, called me back, and all of a sudden it was $800. Where did that $1,400 go? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And if they didn't need it, like, what are they really charging us for? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The whole thing is just like propping up just these massive hospitals and massive universities and whatnot.
It's crazy, man. And I was talking to some buddies. We were kind of talking about money, and so it was in the context of kind of how much should a billionaire give, and how, like them saving the world type of thing, which is a different subject. But we looked up Berkshire Hathaway, and in cash and cash equivalents, they have 125 billion dollars. And I was like, theoretically, they could save the world with all this money. But if Berkshire Hathaway withdrew that much cash from their company, their stock price is going to shoot down. And if their stock price shoots down as a cornerstone of the economy, everyone else's stock price is going to shoot down because people are going to be like, what the heck is going on if they're doing that? And then
Right.
all this value just disappears. So like, was it real?
I think what that one of the facts that does it for me is because I think there's an argument of like, oh, should the rich pay more so we can have all these things, or should the government spend less? And people just think, oh yeah, if we just tax more from the rich, we could have all this stuff. And so if you take every single billionaire's everything, just their wealth, whatever they're worth, if you take all of it, every single billionaire's worth, take all of it, and you'd be able to fund the federal government for 9 months.
What is going on?
Yeah. And then what do you do next year? Because you just you didn't take their yearly gains. You took the totality of what they're all worth. Congratulations, you can fund the federal government for 9 months.
And people also confuse net worth with liquid cash too, which is like,
right.
You see that come up a lot. It's like, yeah, the guy's worth $60 billion, but he can probably get his hands on, a couple of that.
You'll see the memes of like, wow, we went through the coronavirus, and in that time, Jeff Bezos's net worth increased $40 trillion or $40 billion since March or something. And it's like, you look back to the date that they picked, and you look at middle of March, and you're like, well, the stock market bottomed out in the middle of March, and then it came back up. All he did was just own Amazon stock. And so the stock market going from wherever the hell it bottomed out up 40% is the reason why he's up that many billions of dollars, as opposed to like, yeah, he just brought, his bank account just like exploded. It's an ownership stake in a massive company that we all use and purchase and get stuff from.
Man, so let me ask you this. What type of system would you like to see, or what features of the system would you like to see in terms of government? I know small government, the least amount of reach possible. What would it look like to you?
It would look like similar to, I guess, what the founding fathers intended, of a very limited government, not having any involvement. Like I wouldn't have any sort of healthcare involvement whatsoever. I wouldn't have an FDA. I wouldn't have any kind of licensing for doctors. I wouldn't have Medicaid, Medicare. I wouldn't have Social Security. I would have a government that basically had a military, not to intervene with, just any affair possible, but just to protect the interests of the United States and allies. I mean, I think that the war against communism is a rightful one. Back in, I think the Korean War was like a noble war. Like, I wouldn't argue against that, but I think to the point of, interfering in the Middle East and destabilizing Libya for no reason, like, I'm not for any, I wouldn't be for any of that, but a basic, police, fire department, some states and local municipalities could, if they wanted to do a little bit more, fine. Because at least at that level, you can see what works and what doesn't work. So if a state does something, let's say California says, you know what, we're going to try healthcare. I think like, while I'd be against it, I think they should be able to do it. And then you can see, all right, California tried it. Let's see how this goes. And then when it doesn't, you're like, oh, okay. Well, now we know we didn't ruin the entire country. We just, California just made a mistake. But overall, I'm for laissez-faire when it comes to the economy. I have no say, and the government shouldn't be involved in charity. I don't think the government should have welfare. I don't think there should be minimum wage. I don't think there should be any kind of any government floor, I guess. But that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a floor or that there shouldn't be charity. I just think that it should all be by society, by philanthropists, by a culture of giving and working together. And I think one thing I've learned is there is a history of that, because before 1913 there was no federal income tax. There wasn't really any government involvement in much of anything, and people had to figure out how do we survive. And so, you ever heard of mutual aid societies and fraternal lodges?
I've heard of fraternal lodges, but only like like the Freemasons and things like that, and like like the Elks. I don't know if those are even in the same like category, but
They are.
I'm not very familiar with them. That's like name recognition, familiarity type of thing only.
So about a quarter of Americans were a part of either a mutual aid society or a fraternal lodge, and that membership would give you kind of something to do on a regular basis. It would kind of build a community, but many of them would also offer like a floor, basically, in case, let's say, you're in it and your husband dies. The membership dues would go to like pooling money together for your wife, or to pay for your funeral, or many of them started having doctors in contract, where if you needed a doctor to come to your house, needed medical care, it was part of your dues, and it basically became a really affordable way for the poor and immigrants to have kind of basic services, like medical care. So basically, a few days' work would pay for the entire year's worth of your membership, and as a result, you would get medical care as like part of it. That's how the poor were able to just not die in the streets. It was just that medical care wasn't that expensive. There was no licensing at the time, and a lot of doctors didn't like that. They didn't like being undercut, because you'd have these doctors that would seek out these lodge contracts, and they would basically just have to bid to like people that they kind of didn't think highly of, because it was poor people that did this. And so they started pushing politically to say, how do we stop this? Because we don't like having to beg immigrants and Black people and all these different groups for their services. There's even a 1910 New York Times article about it. It was like these people against lodge practice. I'll show you the link afterward.
Yeah. Cool.
They penned this article stating it's called "The Lodge Practice Evil," and talking about just how demeaning it is, just how horrible it is that they have to compete with these doctors that are undercutting their business, and it just embarrasses the profession. And so they worked with the government in the force of law to enact, and through the ADA, one of those two.
We can't know everything, right?
To bring about licensing and making it illegal. They made it illegal to perform to work for a lodge. You couldn't have a license, and you had to go through their licensing procedure, which basically put the whole thing under. And so a valuable way that people were able to provide for themselves creatively without the government was stampeded by the government. And so I think there are already solutions in place. Now imagine a lodge practice or fraternal lodge or mutual aid society today. If with the internet and the networks of people and the wealth and the technology that has gone up, I think a society would be better served if they didn't have this attachment with government. And then if you go forward, like we always just think of how's medical care attached to your employment. Like it's just like why is work and healthcare like a thing?
I hate that. Yeah.
Right. You have to work 40 hours. You got to do whatever to, I mean, just think about how much free people would be if they didn't have to sit there for 40 hours for the benefits. I think maybe people would work 32, 30, 28, whatever. I think a lot of people are, oh, I got to work for it. I got to get my benefits. Or they don't start a business because, I got to get my benefits. That's basically the only way you can get affordable benefits now.
I hear that from so many people. It's the reason that they're scared to, make the jump to entrepreneurship is because they're like, oh,
Yeah.
I'll lose my benefits,
You better get married to someone who's working, and that's basically it. But before the 40s, only 8% of people were using medical insurance or just any form of medical insurance. Things were cheap enough that people could just kind of pay out of pocket. And FDR, through like the New Deal to kind of try to get out of the Great Depression, he had a lot of kind of tinkering, a lot of laws in place. Basically had a minimum wage, but he also had a maximum wage. I said a place couldn't pay at a certain level for certain jobs. And as a result, for any place to be able to employ anybody, or to compete, to be able to offer somebody more to come work for them, began the process of like fringe benefits, of healthcare, of kind of these things on the side. And that was the only way that you could offer somebody more money to come work for you. And then in a few short years, it basically went from 8% reliance to like 45%. And then FDR locked that in to be tax-free or pre-tax contributions, which just even more solidified the use of employee-based healthcare. And it just kind of, it took off from there, where it's just kind of the norm.
Now you have these massive insurance companies, just raking in the dough, benefiting from that.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And the other, I think, the part with healthcare, prices were stable until basically stable with the Consumer Price Index, and then Medicaid and Medicare, which unnaturally inflated the demand and put a lot of regulation in the healthcare industry. And then you see the price of healthcare just take off from the Consumer Price Index. And then you're just kind of at where we're at. But just imagine if the government never got involved in the first place. If we still had these mechanisms for the poor to provide for themselves, and not tying it to employment, and not having the need for Medicaid, not using Medicaid and Medicare, just how much better just healthcare would be. Like I said, you work 40% of the time for the government, and then you spend a lot of money in healthcare. Well, the reason you spend so much in healthcare, most of it is government involvement. Go back 100 years. People are paying their healthcare for a few short days of work, and that's not the case anymore.
So I do have a question, man. I'm actually with you on a lot of that. The one place I'm very curious is, the FDA does a lot of work to control, food safety and things like that. If someone's going to sell me some food, I kind of want to know, they're not being sketchy but I guess, how do we establish some standards to make sure that there's, this kind of safety in society, or do you require that? Do you think that should even be a thing? Do you think that it should just be, you take your own risks and you just have to kind of trust, what's out there type of thing?
I think that society is creative. And so if that is a challenge for a lot of people, let's paint that scenario where we have drugs and food, and we have no idea if it's healthy or not. People are getting sick, whatever. If there's a concern, if there's a need, then entities step in to fulfill that need. Typically, it's just a kind of a signal in the market. What I would envision is a competition for what the FDA does. And we see that in some things where the government doesn't overregulate. Kelly's Blue Book, for example, or just certain things that exist privately. So imagine a private FDA, imagine 2 or 3, and they have a strict approval process for anything that they would put their stamp on, their stamp of approval. So if you were concerned about your food, if you were concerned about your drug, look for that stamp of approval of these places that would kind of gain prestige, that you knew were, man, if they say something is positive, then they don't fuck around. They work with a lot of these institutions. They have a big name. But at the end of the day, if you want to take something that the government doesn't stamp as you know, as to say that you can do this.
It should be
I
your
think you have
right.
the right to do that. So I think you have the right to be stupid. I think if you take a drug or do something where there's no licensing on it whatsoever, I still think you have the right to do it. But I see the mechanisms would appear for people like you that would be of concern if I take this drug, what's going to happen? I think there would just be a private solution to that problem. And then I would things like fraud would still be illegal. So let's say a drug was like, yeah, we put the stamp on, even though we didn't go through any of their checklists or anything. We didn't, engage with them at all. I think the government would then step in and say, no, this is fraud. It would be something that would be done in court. So then you wouldn't be able to lie and say something like, yeah, this is approved and it really isn't.
There still has to be some consequence, man. I think that's true because you derail that situation where someone does everything up front to create this operation that on the surface is legitimate, and then forgoes that after you begin to trust them, just for them to save money and begin to profit more. So I think that you have to have some sort of consequence. Where I think it gets
with the FDA, it's kind of just because they stamp something doesn't make it good.
Yeah, that's true too.
There's a massive example of people that work for drug companies that then come work for the FDA and then go back to working for the drug companies. You constantly see commercials like, did you take Vesipar? You are subject to make a whole bunch of money because your leg fell off.
Right. That's true. Yeah, there's stuff like Teflon and stuff. Like, yeah, I don't know, man. There's all these these different layers to these problems, man. That and I think we're uncovering that a lot. Going through this.
So if a private institution labeled something wrongly, people would just be like, "Oh, fuck them! They don't know what they're talking about." So having that competition, I think, would make for a better FDA because then it's kind of like in business, you have a profit and loss system, and just as important as the gains are the losses. I mean, that's how we don't have shitty companies. Is because if a company just sucks, no one pays it, and it goes away, it just dies. But if the government is really bad at something, then usually it just gets more money and gets more power, and it just doesn't go away.
That's
so
true.
We're up with the FDA, we're stuck with Social Security. Imagine if a private company were to do Social Security, everybody who worked for that company would be arrested.
Yeah. That's true.
So I think that private, that charity, that society, in all of its forms, can do a hell of a lot better voluntarily than the force of law.
I agree with that, man. I think even just as a human being, when I'm told to do something, it just meets this resistance. It's inert feeling inside of me where I'm just I don't want to do it just because you told me, even if it might be better for me. It's just, I don't know. I think there's that at play too, because we have to recognize that we're, human beings and we're subject to emotions and things like that. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I think, there's that layer to it. And I don't know.
One big influence for me was Bastiat's book, The Law. He was a French classical liberal from 1850. And it's the Communist Manifesto is, I think, the most common book that's presented in the university. What should be the most common book is The Law by Frederick Bastiat. It's 55. It's really short. It's 53 pages of fucking poetry, of just libertarian poetry. It's the most beautiful thing. Every single paragraph, you have to read it 8 times, and just everything is just so deep. Where you're just like, what the fuck? It's a 55-page book. It takes a month to get through it. And it presents the moral argument for what the use of law is, and kind of it talks about socialism, talking about the use of law to provide a public good. What does it mean to say something is a right? To say that housing is a right? What does that mean to say that healthcare is a right? Well, government doesn't inherently have anything. So everything the government can offer you, it must either enslave somebody to do something, because it doesn't have any doctors. So you either have to enslave somebody to be a doctor for you, or you have to take money from somebody else to pay somebody to be a doctor for you. And so their only tools are theft or enslavement, force, basically.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
The law is coercion. And so anything that the government provides you, it must either enslave or it must steal. And that's the moral argument for why I'm not a socialist, is because to declare something a positive right is to declare that you have the right to another's labor or another's property. And I don't think you have a right to another's labor or another's property just on a fundamental level.
I hear you, man. And, me as an individual, I'm like, yeah, I don't, it's disturbed. Like that statistic you gave me about the 40% is sitting here disturbing me. Like, it's like, man, I really worked that amount of time for, no benefit,
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, man, I think those are all interesting arguments. I guess, give me your ideas on, what you think people see socialism as and why you think people are so passionate about it, and where you think maybe there can be some middle ground. Does that make sense? Like, is that a clear question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think it's extremely popular. I think it's romanticized. I think it's. I think there's a lot of flaws in the American system, and I think it's just oversimplified as problems in capitalism. And I think if you and I go back on any single one of these issues, whether it be healthcare, whether it be not enough opportunity, I think I can go line by line, whatever issue you want to go with, and point to a progressive, semi-Marxist policy that got us there in the first place. It's never been because as a result of laissez-faire. But I don't think that people are taught that. And so people come out and say, look at all the, the poverty, the housing issues, healthcare, and they just go, capitalism has failed. It's just an easy oversimplification to do. And I think a lot of students come out and, they become socialists. They have socialist professors. I think someone did a study. I think you're more likely to have a Marxist professor than just a Republican professor. Like, I think like 15% to like 5% or something. So I think if you only see this kind of pro-government, pro-institution side of things, and you don't see how does a free society operate? How come you and I did you learn about mutual aid societies and fraternal lodges in any K through 12 schooling?
No, this was just something that I happened upon afterwards. And so I went through this little period of time where I kind of got into conspiracy theories, just because the exploration of ideas. It's just it was interesting to me. It was just kind of like, okay, there are these wacky ideas out there. Are they that wacky? Can I evaluate them, and can I go through this exercise of seeing what I think about them, perhaps without falling subject to them, or learning that there is perhaps some merit to them. So I think it was just a cool exercise for me. But you hear about the Freemasons and these secret societies and stuff, and that's kind of where I got into it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, why do you think that we didn't learn about mutual aid societies and fraternal lodges?
So I have some views on education, man. I think that there's a stake. There's stakeholders who need the populace to get educated enough to be able to function, but not so educated that they kind of go out on their own and do things, because you need to create employees. We need to have some sort of system that creates employees, people who are willing to sit in front of a computer all day and do these tasks. I tell you what, it drives me crazy, man. I love my job. I love the company that I work for, but the idea of having to trade my time to sit in front of a computer and do spreadsheets and stuff like that, it pains me. It pains my existence. So yeah. I think that I don't know, if people get interested in other things in the world and these complex ideas, they probably wouldn't want to sit in front of a computer. So that's how I feel about education a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's definitely a factory model. It creates batches of children that kind of fill into cogs. But I also see, I kind of see a pattern of people having that same kind of mentality, this kind of and this laissez-faire kind of viewpoint. I just feel like everybody has the same ideology in most institutions, and I find that interesting. K through 12, university, Hollywood, everybody seems to be politically aligned. Most news media, social media companies all seem to have the same ideology. And I think that one ideology has just really been successful in getting power into all these institutions and framing your view of the world, and not giving you the other side of the argument, or presenting the entire story. Maybe that's my conspiratorial mind.
No,
But it just,
I
you see
agree.
patterns, you see, like, and it makes sense. It's like, okay, if let's say that this began in the universities, and the kind of Marxist infiltration, the subversion into the universities. You start in the universities, it leads to positions of power. It leads to people in education, who then now K through 12 has the same kind of ideology, and then students, get 12 years of that plus, their university time, and kind of have the same view of the world if they're insulated from, some of the stuff that might sway people's opinions to a world in which we don't need the institutions as much, or we don't need the government to be in such power in our lives. I think pro-government forces have really good propaganda, and anti-government forces have very poor propaganda, and it's usually just a bunch of kind of isolated neckbeards that have too much time on their hands and self-isolate and don't socialize.
No, I hear you, man. I hear you. Yeah, I think that is a great point, because it's like, and to your point earlier, speaking about the cutting edge and society being the best it's ever been, we are approaching this decentralization of ideas with the advent of the internet, right? A lot
Yeah.
more people have platforms to put their ideas out there. I think where we're running into trouble is there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of agendas and things, and it's hard to sift through. And again, it goes back to that patience. It's hard to find, what are the valid sources out there? How can I corroborate, multiple sources to kind of see where there's overlap and, understand what the true picture might be. Let me look on the opposite side and see what they're saying and see if I can get the whole picture. So I think, man, it just takes a willingness of people to continue to work together instead of letting these ideas be fed to us and letting us think that we know what the other person thinks and that the other person is against us just because they have a different perspective on the world,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Um, well, do you want to talk about the recent events?
This is crazy, dude. This has all been wild to
This
me.
year has just been insane.
Yeah. I, I think there'll be classes taught on just this year alone, in universities. Sure. Speaking of universities, but it's interesting. I think, I guess I'll start from, my perspective as Black man. I see a reason for a lot of the anger. I see, these historic injustices that have, kind of held us down a little bit as a collective people. But I don't like a lot of this looting and rioting, though I understand it. I think there are people who are not acting in good faith. There are these, so for instance, my one buddy went down to Indianapolis and he was telling me, like, the different types of people who were down there. He was like, so you had like these white, like, hippie, like, super liberal, like flower children who were just like rolling around in the grass. Yeah, these like, Black Panther type, hardcore. He's like, I didn't even want to like really get in their area. He's like, you have all these different types of people downtown that aren't even, really united in their message. So it's like, I don't know. I think it's.
I think a lot of movements are trying to make it about their passions.
Right. Yeah.
As opposed to like what it's like, like to me, I feel like we could talk for 5 hours about like my views on like Marxist subversion and communism and just how like nobody talks about that as an evil. I mean, communism killed, Nazism killed like 8 million people. It was horrible. I mean, it's terrible. Communism is responsible for 100 million dead in the last century, and barely gets talked about. We don't really go through and learn the genocide and the killing fields and everything related to communism. And I think there's a reason for it, because I think a lot of people are in that camp, in that kind of socialist, Marxist, communist camp. I think it's kind of, like I said, infiltrated the universities in the 60s. It spread to positions of power, it spread into education. And I think a lot of people insulate you from that. Sorry, my daughter's walking around.
Oh, you're good.
Hey, baby. Hold on.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
You want to see her?
Yeah, dude.
You say hi to my friend Ryan? This is Claire.
Hey, Claire. How you doing?
Is it good? I think she's eating
Good. Oh, man. I want some candy. Is it tasty?
Is it good?
Nice. That's
All right,
awesome. Yeah, for sure.
Hey, Beck. You take this video. I'm still on my video. All right, sorry about that.
Oh, no, you're fine, man. You
I
know,
didn't
family
know-
first, dude.
All right, so where were we?
Where were we? We were talking. You
Oh.
were talking about the Marxist infiltration. Like,
Marx? Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
And so I think that my view is I guess your kind of more noble plight is like your desired ends are the means to their desired ends. Like the Antifa types, the people that are leaving bricks suspiciously in front of state like courthouses and stuff like that. Like, I don't think you understand maybe like just how organized socialists are, communists are, Marxists are in the United States. Like if you look up like the United States Democrats of America or Democratic Socialists of America, they have chapters all over the country. You're in Columbus, there's like 3 chapters you can go to.
Whoa.
Yeah, people don't know that.
In the
They're
same city?
all
That's crazy.
in the same city. You pick a city and they have a chapter, for you. And so I don't think people realize just how kind of underground and organized this radical kind of Marxist movement is, and how they operate. They operate by, infiltration. And I think they have a big sway in media, in social media. Like I said, in the universities. And so I don't see their intentions as noble or good, because as a conservative who loves the United States and what it stands for, kind of at least trying to be freedom, I can tear it apart for what the government really is, but just it's still as shitty as it is, it's still the freest country in the entire planet.
And I love it too, man. I love it too. I love it for that reason, with the history and everything said. I love it too.
Yeah. We both want to improve it, but God, what was I going to say?
I'm sorry. Yeah.
The son of a bitch.
Just talking about how much control they have, and
so if somebody who loves the United States, it's in my best interest. It would be in my best interest for any group that resides here to feel accepted and to thrive. I want any Black person, any Asian, Jew, man, woman, gay, whatever. I want everyone to go, this place is amazing. I love this place. They have its flaws, certainly, but overall, this is a really good place. Because the more you think that, then the more you're going to fight with me to keep it that way. Now, the opposite side of that is people who want to be communists, socialists, that want positive rights, that live in this kind of bourgeois society and they don't like it. Well, you can't go from people, enjoying, having a boat and having this great existence to socialism, to, all right, we're going to tell you this is your ration, this is your this. There's not you don't have to work if you don't want to. You are guaranteed these things. And so naturally, if you're guaranteed these things, then where's the motivation to work for them anyway. It just doesn't exist. And so you can't just go from that to nothing. And so you need to kind of tear society down a little bit to build it back up in your image. You can't go from this to socialism. That's why that there's a lot of like Marxist intellectuals that were disappointed at World War I when poor fought poor. Like they thought that would have been the moment where people would have grabbed arms and then the poor would have fought the rich. But nation fought nation. You had these nations where people still liked their basic life and didn't kind of participate in the Marxist revolution. It just basically happened in Russia, where people were just miserable anyway, and it was easier to convince people that fuck this, we should just flip everything in our favor. And so I think there's a lot of people who they want division, they want the chaos, they want the destruction, and more importantly, they want to disenfranchise Black people, because they want them to say, like, listen, this place is fucking terrible. And so let's just say that they have control over the media. What would that look like? And if I were in control of the media and I were Marxist and I wanted to destroy everything, then I would pick something like police brutality, and I'd be very selective with what became national news or what became trending on social media.
What images are we shown,
Yeah. So if I saw a fucked up situation where it's like a white cop, but it was a white person, I'm not going to air that, because what's the point? It doesn't help my narrative. But if my view is that there's an oppressed class and oppressor class, whites are the oppressor class, that's basically the new bourgeoisie proletariat. And I think have you ever heard of the Frankfurt School?
I haven't. No. You're putting me on a lot, man. I'm writing all this down.
I hope you got 9 hours, because we're about to. I'm kidding. The Frankfurt School was a series of Marxists that were disappointed that World War I hadn't gone as predicted, and so they were like, how do we bring about Marxism to the West, to the European nations, to the United States? And they realized that there's just not a lot of cohesion between rich and poor. Meaning, like, poor people don't look at other poor people and be like, we're in this together. So it's really hard to get them to revolt against their masters, the bourgeoisie. And so they kind of they changed it a little bit and thought of pitting kind of these groups against each other and seeing the world instead of the haves versus the have-nots, in the framework of the oppressed versus the oppressor. And I think they just kind of took these different groups: Black versus white, gay versus straight, man versus woman, cisgender person versus non-cisgender person, however divisible you can make things, and then pit them against each other in the kind of a similar form as bourgeoisie and proletariat. And when I kind of got into this, like, you have a prevailing theory of how the universe works, and then you kind of test it out and be like, well, that doesn't really make any sense. Or that kind of changed it or whatever. When I adopted that kind of viewpoint of things are just modified bourgeoisie, proletariat, oppressor, all of a sudden everything's just like, well, that makes fucking sense. That makes fucking sense. It's like one of those 3D paintings from like the 90s. Remember those random paintings?
You like stare at it for so long.
Yeah, you're looking at it, you're like, what the fuck? You zoom in, but once you see it, you don't unsee it. It's just like, every single time I fucking see it. Yeah. And so I see it in every single fucking news story where it's like, oh, I wonder why this is trending, or I wonder why this is national media. Because, man, watch the local news and horrible shit happens all fucking day, every day. It's like land of 340 million people. It is easy to make anything seem like an epidemic. And so I see, from my point of view, I see this as them being selective and saying, hey, we know that it's oppressed versus oppressor. So anything that we can show you that confirms that bias of, hey, there it is. And it might be 2 years before you see it again.
Yep.
And so the whole thought the police weren't killing anybody. And then all of a sudden it's in the news for like 2 weeks. They have music. It goes dun dun. And they, just drum it up into this massive
red text and stuff like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. They have a song for it. They have a name on the title, like, racist attack again, or mass shooting event, or whatever.
Yeah.
You just, in the same reaction, people go, what is this world coming to? what is this world coming to? Well, we live in a big fucking place. And it's really easy to turn things into your perception of what reality is. And, you know, so when I look at it, and this is just my point of view, I look at the unarmed shootings of last year. And in all of 2019, there were 9 unarmed black men that were killed by, or I don't know if it was probably mostly men, because 95% of police shootings are men. But it was 9 black people were killed by police officers in 2019. 19 unarmed white people were killed by police officers in 2019. That's from the Washington Post. They did like a police database, and so they started in 2015. And in 2015, the numbers were like 38 and 32. Actually, 38 black, 32 white unarmed. And then it just kind of went down after this focus on police brutality, and it went down to 19 and 9 last year. And so I look at that, I'm like, it's sad. It's a really sad story, and I hope that the 4 officers are charged and given justice. And you know, I think there's solidarity on that. I don't think a lot of people were defending the officers, even officers across, like, yeah, it's pretty fucked up. They should have, you know, got off of him, see if he could breathe, like whatever. Like he didn't deserve it. But I see that being drummed up and turned into a national thing that just people see the clippets and they go, this is my world, this is my reality. And it's selective confirmation bias that I think they're playing off of. And while there is problems, I mean, obviously there's problems. You can always do better. We don't live in utopia. Right. There are never going to be 0 instances of anything, of mass shootings, of police shootings, whatever. We are an imperfect species, and there's evil that happens, there's bad things that happen, and we'll never live in a world of 0 bad things. And I don't think we would want to live in a world of 0 bad things because of what it would take to actually get there. But 0 bad things seems to be endless justification for carrying out tyranny almost. If we don't have 0 bad things, we could have no mass shootings for 5 years. That'd be remarkable.
Yeah.
And then one time it happens, boom, boom, it's all over every single news thing. You go, what the fuck is going on? 9 dead in mall, including a little girl, and blah, 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 blah. And then the whole country goes, fuck it, we got to get rid of our guns. There can always be endless justification for whatever extreme measure you have, if your goalposts are utopia, are 0. If you are if it's utopia or bust, then, you know, it's going to be bust. And I think that's kind of what a lot of color revolutions look like. It's not utopia, let's destroy it. And so and that's my fear with this, is that it's being used for another's benefit. So black people want justice, but I don't see their movement as nearly as organized as the Democratic Socialists of America, of Marxists, of Antifa, of these Weather Underground. They're motivated. They have an agenda. They have an organization. You know, tell me this, what specifically does the movement appear to want? Because it just seems vague, meaning they don't have a clear, like, this is the threshold that we want to be at. We're here. Our issue is such and such. You know, I just see it as outrage, as just it's kind of trendy outrage, but I don't see specifics of like, all right, I'm pissed off because blank, and I want to fix blank. I just see it as overall, fuck the system. We hate America. This is what it always is. It's oppressed versus oppressor. Burn it all down. And that's what it looks like to me. And I see the Marxists fanning the flames, being like, here's some bricks.
Yeah. Here's some bricks.
They're just like, fucking destroy
like Jerry Springer. We will
rebuild this shit in our image. And so that's kind of my viewpoint of it. While it's horrible, I kind of see the strings being pulled in someone else's directions. And this outrage is just the means to their ends.
I don't disagree at all, man. I actually had a conversation with some of my buddies about this, because one of my buddies was just kind of like, what are we even fighting for? Like, what's the goal? He's like, what is the goal here? And even thinking about Black Lives Matter, just as a phrase, So it's like, there's a group, Black Lives Matter. There are people who are using it as a call to action. Like, I'm important as a Black person. For some people, it's just a hashtag. And then for other people, they're grouping all these rioters and looters under that same umbrella. And so we don't even agree on like what that is. You know what I mean?
I'm always suspicious of vague conceptual battles. Like
Right.
Black Lives Matter to me is way too vague in its concept. To me, I hear the war on terror. I don't
The war
know what
on
that
terror.
means.
That's who are we fighting? Who are
Exactly.
we fighting in the war on terror?
That
Yeah.
sounds like justification for getting a finger stuck up your butt at the airport and bombing a bunch of random nations you've never heard of. Like, it's not. I need specifics. I don't like just vague. We're fighting the patriarchy. We're fighting whatever. It's like, what the fuck does that mean? What are you truly against? What specifics do you want? So we know that, okay, we're getting there.
Yeah.
But it's just justification for destruction, I think.
Bro, speaking of airports, to kind of take a side route from what you were just saying exactly, now that I'm in a wheelchair, I had to go through secondary clearance. They had to look inside my underwear to make sure that I wasn't smuggling drugs and shit. Like, they thought my wiener was drugs. And I'm like, dude, like, that's just my wiener. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, come on, is this necessary? Like, it was, I don't know, man. It's brutal. But yeah, I think you're right, man. I think we've been pitted against each other. I think an interesting question is, who is pulling the strings? Who is running this all? And those aren't the questions that people sit back and ask each other. And I think it takes us coming to the table like this, man, to really figure things out like that. Because it's like, you're my brother, bro. You're my dude. It's like, you're another citizen. You're someone I care about.
When we get together, we'll probably find that we agree on fucking 95% of shit. Even if at the beginning of this, you said that you're left of center. I said I'm far right. And we come and talk to each other and we go, I agree with 95% of what the fuck you're talking about. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
You think you're in different camps. You're in the exact same camp. And if we could re-identify and say, no, this is the battle we should be fighting. We should be fighting against, to me, the battle should be against people who want to be free versus people who want control over other people. That's how I define the line.
Yeah,
it's black versus white's not productive. You're not getting just destruction. But to me, what's productive is fighting government tyranny, fighting people who want control over others with free people.
Amen. Amen. And honestly, I might have to leave you on that. My mom just got here. She's texting me. But I would love if you would drop me a reading list. I know I'm reading The Law, that book, 55 pages. You said it would take a while. That's on my list now.
Give yourself a month.
Yeah. I'll take it slow, man. So, yeah, I'd love to read that. Check back with you on your interpretation and see if we're, interpreting it the same way. And I'd love to get together and do this again sometime, man.
For sure, man. I think I don't know if you'd be open to it. I think we could make a good little podcast where, we're talking about different things.
Yeah,
I probably pick any subject and just fucking hash it out for, and kind of work it out. But I think this went pretty well. I mean, we didn't sound stupid. We didn't go I think it was a good experiment.
Same, man. Same. I would love to do that. And what do you feel about doing something with this? Do you want to upload it somewhere? And would you mind if we did that, or what do you think?
Please. Yeah, please. If you know how, I'm not as tech savvy as you are.
Yeah, man. I'll upload it to YouTube or something.
See it, share it, put it on Facebook. I don't care. I think it was a really good conversation.
Me too, man. Awesome. Cool. Well, hey, like I said, looking forward to the next time we do it, bro. Let's stay in touch. And much love to you, man.
You too, man.
Yep.
Thank you.
See you.